As all these new technical solutions emerge, the old forms cease to work, and in their place, literally out of nowhere, new forms come into being. They're gaining strength every day and become established on the market. And at some point, all the infinite pieces of this new puzzle fit together, and the new revolution of everything moves from the garages to the stage of its scaling. It moves into the era of conveyor assembly lines. And these are not just beautiful words. This is exactly what is happening with the blockchain technology right now. It simply devours the old world, and soon there will be nothing left of it that we are all so used to, at least if we are talking about money. But despite all this, our task is to take the long view, often through the years ahead, and create for ourselves our new, and I hope, successful future. And therefore, what I'm telling you about today will allow you to take part in the work of the conveyor assembly line and not be an indifferent spectator. Unfortunately, most people choose the path of inert spectators. They prefer to wait, but the price of their fears, in my opinion, is huge because only the pioneers succeed. And today I want to spotlight the concept of the development of our entire ecosystem, our entire metaverse in the context of everything that is happening around us, in the world as a whole. This will help you understand certain decisions that we have made in the past or will make in the future. And as they say, understanding is the best foundation for joint activities. As I often do, I'll start with a historical analogy, this time with the Olympic Games analogy. We all know that some of the most famous moments in the history of sports took place exactly at the Olympic Games. In 1900, the first female athletes took part in the Olympic Games in Paris. In 1936, African-American sprinter Jesse Owens broke records and won several gold medals at the Berlin Olympics, shattering Adolf Hitler's dream of making the games his example of a new Aryan man. Another landmark event took place at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, when two American sprinters raised their fists in a gesture of salutation to African-American athletes during the medal ceremony. During those same games, American Bob Beamon broke the world record in the long jump. Americans couldn't forget the epic 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, when the US ice hockey team defeated four-time Olympic champions, the Soviet team, in the legendary miracle on the ice game. The 1992 Barcelona Olympics hosted the first American Dream Team, which included basketball greats such as Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Charles Barkley. American swimmer Michael Phelps won a record 8 gold medals at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. However, the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing may make it into history as the most fateful, though not because of sports achievements, but because of what happened outside of sports achievements. Back in 1986, the International Olympic Committee entered into an agreement with Visa. And this made credit card operator Visa the sole payment service provider for the Summer and Winter Olympics. And if you've been to the Olympics in the past 36 years and needed to pay for something at the venues, then the Visa card was the only option other than cash. All this changed in one day at the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. That's when the Chinese government challenged Visa's monopoly by offering its own payment method, the digital yuan, also known as CNY. And anyone who lived or worked in the Olympic Village in Beijing then had 3 payment options instead of the usual 2: Visa, cash, and digital yuan. It came as no surprise the Chinese government had chosen the Olympics as the venue for the debut of its digital yuan. This is the largest sporting event in the world. Thousands of athletes, media representatives, and fans attend the games every 2 years. And let me remind you that the Olympic Games are held alternately every 2 years, in summer and in winter. So hundreds of millions of people around the world follow the events on television or the internet. Obviously, the Olympic Games were pre-planned by the People's Bank of China as a global event to present the digital yuan. By November 2022, 8 months later to be exact, the digital currency had processed nearly 10 billion worth of transactions. Since 2022 Winter Olympics, China has been insistently promoting it as the national currency of choice. And to achieve this goal, it offers the citizen many incentives. For example, residents of Shenzhen City can participate in the lottery and get a free digital yuan. The local government has also distributed almost $5 million in digital yuan to stimulate consumer spending. In the city of Zhangjiang, the government has offered digital subsidies to help residents pay for food, electronics, home appliances, and furniture during the pandemic. So in total, officials gave away 50 million worth dollars of digital money as gifts to those who were willing to accept the digital yuan. According to the head of the Digital Currency Research Institute at the People's Bank of China, Miu Changchun, more than 150 million users have registered for the CNY accounts to date, which can be accessed via a smartphone app. So just think about it. More than 10% of China's population have adopted the digital yuan in just 8 months. Something else is important here. The launch of China's digital yuan at the 2022 Olympics set an example for other countries looking to launch their own central bank digital currency. Currently, 114 countries, representing more than 95 of the world's gross domestic product, are exploring the possibility of introducing a central bank digital currency. And 11 of them have already launched their digital currency, including Jamaica, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. The biggest benefit of digital currency will be in quick settlements. Instead of waiting for several days, transactions will be carried out instantly, like when paying in cash. In addition to that, countries can provide access to their currency through a smartphone, bypassing the traditional banking system, as China did with the digital yuan. And this will have a deadly effect on the entire modern banking system. If you look at the banking crisis in the US earlier this year, you will understand what I'm talking about. In the next 10 years, we may see about 1.5 billion people around the world adopt digital currency. Yes, it is absolutely so. And I'm almost certain that in just 10 years, 1.5 billion people will be using digital currencies. People will accept them simply because of the convenience of using them. However, all this will not be a romantic ideal in the Garden of Roses. It is very likely that this will be the beginning of the end of your financial freedom. It was just recently, on July 26th, when the US government launched the new FedNow digital coin. We still have little data on this event, but I will undertake to make some expert assessments on this matter. So in my opinion, FedNow will be the biggest change to the US monetary system since the country abandoned the gold standard in 1971. Right now, FedNow is not a digital currency like China's digital yuan, well, at least not yet. But it will act as a Trojan horse, allowing the government to monitor every financial transaction you make. That is why we see the launch of FedNow as the first test before the full implementation of state-backed digital currency in the US. Friends, we all know that the US government will use the digital dollar to infiltrate and control every aspect of our lives. What's scary about this is that the government can cut off anyone's access to their digital money for any reason at any time. And if the government bans the use of cash, you will literally be left without access to your funds. Unsurprisingly, polls show that once Americans become aware of all the ways digital money can potentially be used against them, 3 out of 4 oppose such an introduction. However, the governments believe that the advantages of state-backed digital currencies outweigh their shortcomings. In a sense, this is true. Over 60% of consumers want faster settlements and payments. So don't be surprised if the US government offers its incentives for people so they accept the digital dollar, just like China did for the digital yuan. Trust me, friends, state-backed digital money will be the money of the future. It cannot be avoided, period. The International Monetary Fund has long been working on payment systems between countries using digital money based on blockchain technology. In just 1 month, in May of this year, the Bank for International Settlements and the Bank of England tested 33 apps that will allow them to conduct transactions using government digital currencies. The different variations of these applications included online, offline, and in-store payments using QR codes, mobile phones, smart cards, and more. The European Commission is also working on its own version of the digital euro. It is creating a regulatory framework that will give it terrifying power over its citizens' money and potentially allow it to change the value of the euro overnight. Or the Commission can suddenly introduce an expiry date for its digital money, which you thought was a safe store of value, which means you have to use it immediately or lose it. Under the proposed monetary regime by the European Commission, the whole of Europe will become a glass house, where the government looks into every financial transaction of every person. The same is expected in the near future in America. FedNow, the new digital coin that I've been talking about today, is just a new infrastructure that they will use to implement the digital dollar. FedNow's fast transaction settlement times will be the lure that will convince many Americans to accept the digital dollar. And what will happen later in 5, 10, 20 years will be a completely different story. That's why we call FedNow a Trojan horse. Many people inadvertently invite the government to look into their most intimate financial information and assume that it will be all for their own good. Personally, I struggle to find anything as far from the truth as the statement that the government will monitor our every transaction and completely control our funds for our own good. This story is not from this planet. So, friends, I want to convey to you my main idea that regardless of the advantages of government digital money, it is a huge threat to your financial security. I could even say that in this case, you no longer have financial security. Can we even call it financial security if you can lose access to your funds, which are 100% controlled by the government at any moment? That is why we have created our own strategy in order to protect your financial security and increase your wealth. I personally, my president's office, the international office, we understood this real threat to all people on the planet 5 years ago, when we had just started masterminding our digital development strategy. We were sure that this would happen, but back in the day, we didn't know when it would happen. Now, 5 years later, I'm telling you, it has already happened. And as we now see, all this is happening according to an accelerated scenario. And now we will once again have to accelerate in order to realize what we have planned, to protect our clients, and even make a profit from the upcoming mass introduction of state digital currencies and establishment of total control over people. I already said that right now, FedNow is not a state-backed digital currency, but it creates the necessary infrastructure to launch those. We're at approximately the same stage of development now. For the last 3 years, we have been intensely developing our own infrastructure, our own ecosystem, our own metaverse, which to one degree or another will be able to support our own digital economic system outside the immediate boundaries of the new fiat system of state digital currencies. And this is the new financial security that we have worked so hard to create for our clients over the past 12 years. Your gold can be easily confiscated as it was in America in 1933, but if you keep your digital assets in a decentralized blockchain-based system, only you are the owners and have full control over them. I repeat, only you have full control over over your assets, not the government. We have looked at the state digital currencies from many different angles, so we know what to do to take advantage of the opportunities that come from the new blockchain technology while protecting your wealth at the same time. Before I return to the issue of the development of our ecosystem, I will give you another historical example of just how irresponsible governments can be towards ordinary people. And this should be a warning to all of us that the entire responsibility for our well-being lies solely with ourselves. In the mid-1960s, under the leadership of President Lyndon B. Johnson, the US government began spending at an incredible rate. From the 1960s to 1965, spending tripled from $40.9 billion to $122.7 billion, due in large part to the Vietnam War. And during that decade, Johnson also launched his Great Society initiative. It was an ambitious series of legislation and programs to end poverty, reduce crime, eliminate inequalities, and improve the environment. In total, the US spent $120 billion on the war in Indochina, or about $1 trillion in today's dollars. Many Great Society programs, such as Medicare, Health Insurance Fund, continue to exist to this day, more than 50 years later, with an estimated total cost of over $16 trillion. However, in the 1960s, the US dollar was still pegged to gold, and this meant that other countries could exchange their dollar reserves for gold. And that's exactly what happened. As government spending spiraled out of control, countries began to get rid of the dollar and exchange it for gold, which has always been considered a stable store of value. By 1965, France began converting its dollar holdings into gold and moved it from the New York Federal Reserve Vault to France. Other countries followed suit. To stop this drain, US President Nixon announced sweeping changes in 1971. Without warning the American people, the president went on live television and dropped the dollar back to the gold standard in what is now known as the Nixon shock. This is how he justified this unprecedented move. We must protect the position of the American dollar as the pillar of the monetary stability around the world. Nixon said he acted in the interest of protecting the American people. In fact, we know that this new dollar regime eventually gave the government the ability to print money unrestrictedly. After 1971, the US dollar became a fiat currency. The Federal Reserve was free to print money without regard to gold reserves. Most people didn't understand what was happening. This took them by surprise. The result was that inflation bankrupted American consumers in the 1970s. Their purchasing power collapsed. And since then, the dollar has lost 87% of its value, as you can see in the chart below. Here's another way to look at it. It would now take about $7.82 of today's money to buy the same amount of goods and services that you could have bought for just $1 in 1970. In other words, under the US dollar regime, the majority of Americans have become substantially poorer. That's why I'm telling you this story. In the coming months, we may see President Biden go on national television like Nixon did in 1971 and announce a new regime of the dollar. He'll say it's for your own good. He'll say the government is doing this to stop the new de-dollarization trend. He'll assure you they're doing it to keep the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Historians might even call it the Biden shock afterwards, because it would take the most people by surprise.
Think about it. The Fed manages over $8 trillion, and it can print unlimited amounts of money on demand. Look, if you're confused or worried about these new developments, then I understand you very well. You're probably thinking, Mr. President, you must be crazy. The government will never seek such power. It will never try to control our lives in this way. My answer to that? Have you ever heard the expression, never miss an opportunity to exploit a crisis? Just as it did in the 1970s with the Nixon shock, the government will use any crisis to increase its power. And now we're in the middle of a huge US dollar crisis. Before I move on to our action plan, let me tell you more about this new dollar crisis, because it's different from anything we've seen before. Most countries use dollars to conduct international trade because it is the world's reserve currency. Therefore, central banks must hold dollar reserves. This has been the case since the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, which established the dollar as the main world reserve currency. This agreement was a game changer, as it created a guaranteed demand for the US dollar. This is one of the main reasons why America has become a superpower. The problem is that the US government has been abusing this privilege for decades. The US public debt has literally blown up, especially in the last 2 decades. As you can see in the chart above, the US debt is almost $32 trillion. That's about $94,000 per each citizen. And as if that wasn't enough, in February of 2022, the Biden administration moved to a whole new level of this debt. To punish Russia, the US froze all dollar reserves of the Central Bank of Russia. This amounted to $630 billion. The rest of the world watched this unprecedented action and thought, wait a minute. If the US can do this to a nuclear power like Russia, then they can do this to anyone. And that is why a growing number of countries in Asia, Europe, and Latin America have recently announced plans to move away from the US dollar as the only reserve currency and trade their national currencies instead. For example, China and Russia used to buy goods from each other with US dollars, but the volume of trade with their own currencies grew by 8,000% in the last year alone. Russia and China are not the only countries joining the de-dollarization trend. Finance ministers of Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, including Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Brunei, recently met behind closed doors and also decided to move away from the US dollar. If that's not enough for you, look at Saudi Arabia. For the past 48 years, it has only accepted US dollars in exchange for oil, which it sells to other countries. But now, Saudi Arabia says it is considering trading in currencies other than the US dollar. Even some of America's allies want to reduce their reliance on the green currency. French President Emmanuel Macron recently urged Europe to end its reliance on the US dollar. The Bloomberg headline, "Suddenly, everyone is hunting for alternatives to the US dollar," speaks for itself. The share of the US dollar among the world's reserve currencies fell from 73% in 2001 to 47% this year, the lowest level ever. Most Americans don't realize how serious this is. Due to its status as the world's first reserve currency, the US dollar has always been in high demand. That is why the American government could spend money without any consequences, like drunken sailors. This is a huge advantage that literally provided the American standard of living. So the fact that countries around the world are now moving away from the US dollar faster than in the 2 previous decades is a huge crisis. However, as I said, the government never misses an opportunity to exploit a crisis. In order to stop this de-dollarization trend, I believe the US government will introduce a new monetary regime, the digital dollar, and then every other government on the planet will do the same. And it will leave the government more control over your money. If you think that this is some crazy conspiracy theory, just listen to what Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said about CBDC at a conference recently. Powell is openly speaking about this idea. It even made headlines. Yahoo Finance wrote, US explores central bank digital currency to preserve dollar's reserve status. And Bank of America wrote something similar. The US government digital currency will maintain the status of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Please look at this. The digital dollar is real. And we may be only a few months away from the official announcement of this. According to the competent Atlantic Council, 114 countries are exploring digital currencies. Their combined economies account for over 95% of the world's GDP. In other words, the whole world supports state digital currencies. China, India, Nigeria, and the Bahamas have already issued digital currencies. Other countries, such as Sweden and Japan, are preparing for possible issue. These governments believe that digital currency will be an improvement over traditional forms of money because it will move more freely around the world through digital wallets and bypass the tangled web of commercial banks and money transfer companies. If you have ever experienced a delay in your bank payment, then you'll agree that fast, near-instant payments sound like a fantastic improvement. Of course, it will also give the government an unprecedented ability to monitor and control how you spend your money. When the government implements a digital currency, it gets direct access to your digital account. For example, in the event of the next pandemic, the Federal Reserve could simply deposit stimulus checks into the digital accounts of every US citizen. And if the economy overheats, they can do the opposite. They may freeze some of your money to cut consumer spending